What if I told you that somewhere in West Africa, far from Wall Street and Washington, far from Silicon Valley and its billion-dollar machines, there's a forgotten country that's quietly doing what the world's richest nations have failed to do. They're building roads, real roads, roads that last, not from concrete, not from asphalt, but from the trash the world throws away. Old tires. While America burns trillions in endless foreign wars and bails out failing banks, Burkina Faso, one of the poorest nations on earth, is building something extraordinary from the waste others ignore. And behind it all stands a man with no golden parachute, no Ivy League degree, and no Wall Street backers. Just a uniform, a vision, and an unwavering belief that change begins at home. His name is Ibrahim Traoré, and he may be the most quietly revolutionary leader alive today. This isn't a fairy tale. It's not foreign aid. It's not a UN program. It's a homegrown movement. And it begins with a single daring question. What if the solution wasn't across the ocean, but already under our feet? If you've ever driven down a cracked road in Ohio, if you've ever wondered why no one does anything about those piles of tires behind factories, if you've ever thought that maybe the best ideas don't come from the top, then this story is for you. Because what's happening in Burkina Faso right now isn't just infrastructure, it's inspiration. Subscribe if you believe the truth is more important than the headlines. Share this video if you believe we should stop waiting for permission to rise. The revolution isn't coming. It's already here, and it's being built one tire at a time. In 2022, when Captain Ibrahim Traoré stepped into power, Burkina Faso was a nation stitched together by dirt paths and broken promises. Roads weren't just damaged, they were dangerous. In the rainy season, entire communities were cut off, swallowed by mud. In the dry season, the heat split the pavement like glass. A single trip to a hospital could mean life or death, depending on the weather. And in the villages, mothers prayed that ambulances wouldn't get stuck. Farmers lost entire harvests because produce couldn't reach the market on time. It wasn't just inconvenience, it was a national crisis. And it had been that way for decades. No one did anything except borrow more money from abroad to fix what would break again the next season. But Ibrahim Traoré did something no one expected. He didn't beg for loans, he didn't wait for donors. He looked at a pile of trash and saw possibility. Every year, the world throws away more than 1 billion used tires. Most end up in landfills polluting rivers and clogging landscapes. In the US, we burn them or bury them. In Africa, they pile up black rings of toxic waste-breeding mosquitoes and disease. But what if Traoré wondered they weren't waste at all? What if they were raw materials? Instead of importing asphalt, his engineers began collecting tires, thousands of them, from scrapyards, back roads, markets, and junkyards. Not just car tires, truck tires, bicycle tires, tractor tires, anything rubber. The entire country became a giant cleanup crew. Then came the innovation. The tires weren't shredded or melted. They were laid directly onto the ground, carefully arranged like puzzle pieces in a reinforced pattern. Then, a specially formulated cement designed to bond with rubber and endure Burkina Faso's brutal temperature swings was poured in and around them. This wasn't just building roads, it was fusing strength with flexibility. The result 40% cheaper than traditional concrete roads, far more durable in heat, rain, and time, self-cushioning under pressure, reducing cracking from heavy vehicles. Earthquake-resistant because the tires flex with movement instead of braking, but that's just the surface. These roads aren't just stronger, they're smarter. Rubber naturally absorbs shock, so when trucks pass over them, the impact is absorbed and distributed. No more potholes forming after a single storm. No more endless repair crews patching up the same stretches every few months. And the most beautiful part? The environment is healing. Each mile of road removes hundreds of tires from polluting the landscape and locks them permanently into the ground, never to rot or burn again. It's not just recycling, it's upcycling on a national scale. In one rural area near Kaya, villagers used to take 5 hours to reach the nearest hospital. Today, with a tire road in place, the same trip takes less than 60 minutes. That's not just infrastructure. That's a mother's life. That's a baby's chance to be born safely. That's food getting to market before it spoils. And here's the twist most economists didn't see coming. This wasn't just a construction project. It was the birth of a new economy. Tire collection became a livelihood. Sorting, cleaning, preparing, laying young men and women from across the country now had real jobs. Communities once dependent on foreign aid now pump cash into their own hands. Local businesses supply tools. Local schools train workers. Entire towns have been revitalized not by outside investors, but by their own labor and waste. In fact, some engineers began experimenting with filling the hollow tire centers with recycled plastic and sand, creating even stronger foundations. They're not just copying the model, they're improving it. This is not a temporary fix. This is a paradigm shift. Burkina Faso isn't just building roads. It's building sovereignty mile by mile, tire by tire. So, the next time you drive over a cracked road in Detroit or watch another federal highway budget fight on television, ask yourself this: if Burkina Faso can build stronger roads from garbage, what's stopping us? The real turning point wasn't when the first tire road was completed. It was when satellite images, yes, real satellite data, started showing changes that no one could ignore. In less than a year, swaths of land once scorched brown by the African sun began turning green. Not just around the roads, but spreading outward following patterns of access opportunity and growth. How? Because one road led to another. And those roads led to farmers. And farmers, for the first time in decades, had a way to get water, thanks to Project 2, the artificial canal system. Let's take a step back. Burkina Faso sits in the heart of the Sahel, an unforgiving region with two extremes: devastating rain followed by months of drought. The rain would pour violently, abundantly, but with no infrastructure to hold it. The water rushed out of the country faster than hope could take root. That's when Traoré asked the next daring question: what if we don't wait for rain to come? What if we keep it when it does? Out of that vision came one of the most ambitious water projects the country has ever seen. During the rainy season, giant catchment reservoirs now trap millions of gallons of rainwater. From there, a network of hand-dug canals, some by machine, most by human hands, stretch out like veins into the countryside, directing water to dry zones all year long. The people called them veins of the land. Suddenly, dead fields woke up. Farmers planted seeds knowing they'd grow. Entire villages that once depended on imported rice began producing surplus crops. Young people who once fled to cities searching for work, now they're returning, becoming part of new agricultural cooperatives, fish farms forming in the reservoirs, schools reopening with better nutrition, markets growing along canal paths. And the world noticed. First came the neighboring countries, Mali, Niger, Chad. They sent delegations not with demands, but with notebooks and cameras. They walked the roads. They tasted the food grown from canal-irrigated farms. They saw young men barefoot, shirtless, shouting instructions as they guided wheelbarrows full of water storing cement under a blazing sun. Then came European environmental NGOs. And this time, they didn't arrive with checkbooks or development frameworks. They came with admiration. Eco-road innovation, decentralized water resilience, bottom-up green infrastructure. That's what they called it. They called it a model for the global south. But in Burkina Faso, they simply called it common sense. And this is where the emotional climax of the story truly lands. Because these weren't just technical achievements. These were acts of defiance. Against the idea that Africans must wait for permission to develop. Against the assumption that real innovation only happens in glass towers and Western labs. Against the silent belief that progress only belongs to the powerful. Every paved road of rubber. Every drop of saved water. Every field now blooming where once it cracked. It was all a collective answer to the world's doubt, and the people felt it. You could see it in the way elders gathered to watch road crews work, sitting in shade, silent, eyes wide. You could hear it in the songs women sang while planting along new irrigation lines. You could feel it in the voice of a teenage boy who told a visiting journalist. They used to say we were too poor to fix our roads. Now they come to us for answers. And when footage of the tire roads and green canals began to circulate online, especially in Pan-African circles and diaspora communities across the U.S., France, Brazil, something rare happened. Respect, not pity, not charity, not guilt, but admiration, a pride that crossed oceans. And it's no surprise that American engineers, especially those in small-town departments trying to stretch budgets, began quietly emailing the Ministry of Public Works in Ouagadougou, asking for documentation, blueprints, details, anything. Because suddenly the question wasn't, can Africa learn from us? But rather, what have we been too arrogant to learn from them? And in that moment, among tire tracks and water ditches, a global shift began. The roads didn't just change how people traveled, they changed how people thought. In a small village near Dori, an elder stood on a new tire-paved path and whispered to his grandson, "This is the first road we've had since your great-grandfather walked barefoot to market." That moment, quiet unrecorded, said more than any speech ever could. Because for the people of Burkina Faso, these roads, these canals, this transformation, it wasn't just about concrete or water. It was about recognition. It was about dignity. And above all, it was about belonging. For decades, public infrastructure in Burkina Faso was seen as a privilege for the capital city. Ouagadougou got the highways, the elites got the lights, the rural poor got promises. But now, under Ibrahim Traoré, something unheard of was happening. Development was coming from the margins inward. The villages weren't just receiving aid. They were being treated as anchors of the nation. And that shift, economic at first, soon began to reshape the political consciousness of the country. In neighborhood councils, farmers who had never voted were now organizing cooperatives. In town halls, youth once ignored were raising hands and making demands. They had seen what was possible. Now they wanted more. A father from Bobo Dioulasso, watching his daughter cross a new bridge to school, said it best. "If they can build this road for us, maybe they can listen to us too." The people began to believe that governance wasn't something distant. It was something they could shape. Traoré, once seen as a transitional figure, a soldier stepping in to calm a country in crisis, began to be viewed as something else entirely. A builder of institutions, a restorer of public trust, a leader with dirt under his nails and blueprints in his hands. But with popularity came pressure. As word spread of Burkina Faso's unorthodox success, especially its refusal to follow the traditional donor dependency path, some international actors grew uneasy. The IMF, once in quiet negotiations with the transitional government, suddenly began warning against unsustainable national projects. Foreign media painted Traoré's administration as improvisational populist or untested. French outlets referred to him with suspicion, le capitaine rebelle. But at home, the opposite happened. Burkinabe citizens who once feared their government now began defending it. Journalists started documenting not just corruption, but construction. Teachers included road building and environmental science classes. Clergy blessed canal openings as acts of stewardship. Even former critics of the regime admitted I didn't vote for him. But I walk on his road every morning. And I haven't twisted my ankle once. And perhaps the most telling indicator came not from any official statement, but from the civil service. Enrollment in public engineering schools doubled. Young people who once dreamed only of migrating to Europe now dreamed of becoming ingénieurs de souveraineté, engineers of sovereignty. Traoré didn't just build roads, he built a new political imagination, one where development didn't mean waiting for grants, where patriotism wasn't about waving a flag, but laying foundation stones with your own hands. And as this mindset took hold, something profound began to happen. The citizenry grew more demanding, more informed, more engaged. They wanted more canals, more solar power, more say in how their country moved forward. In the streets of Ouagadougou, a mural appeared. It showed a road made of tires curling upward like a staircase into the sky. On each step stood a different profession, a builder, a nurse, a student, a grandmother. At the top was a single word in bold white paint. Nous bâtissons. We are building. That mural captured it all. The roads weren't just pavement. They were a political awakening. For the first time in generations, Burkina Faso wasn't just surviving. It was designing its future. And the world, whether it liked it or not, was being asked to watch and learn. In Washington, they barely mentioned it. A line or two buried deep in a development report. In New York, think tanks whispered about alternative models of infrastructure. At MIT, one professor called it an intriguing case of low-tech resilience. But on the ground in Burkina Faso, what was happening wasn't just intriguing, it was historic. And slowly, quietly, the world began to shift its gaze. Across Africa, presidents and engineers from Niger, Mali, Chad sent delegations. They didn't come to lecture, they came to learn. They didn't bring advisors, they brought notebooks. In Latin America, where rubber waste and drought plague rural communities, environmental activists began studying the canal models. In South Asia, urban planners started rethinking what smart city really means, because it turns out the smartest cities may not have skyscrapers at all. They may have solar rooftops on every home. And then there was America. The United States, long positioned as the example the world should follow, now found itself confronted by an uncomfortable question. What if the example is now coming from West Africa? As rural towns in Mississippi and West Virginia face decaying roads and dying industries, as small counties debate whether to fix bridges or fund schools, as rubber waste clogs up landfills coast to coast, Burkina Faso, one of the world's poorest countries on paper, is doing more with trash than some of the richest nations do with trillions. That's not just innovation, that's revolution by example. And for older Americans, especially those who lived through the New Deal, who remember when infrastructure was about people, not profit, there's something hauntingly familiar in Traoré's vision. Jobs that stay local, materials that don't need to be imported, pride in public works, hope rooted in hands, not headlines. Isn't that what America once stood for? But here's the hard truth. For too long, the global North exported two things, its waste and its wisdom, and both were treated as priceless. Now, countries like Burkina Faso are sending something back. A lesson, not in charity, not in ideology, but in courage. And if America is willing to listen, really listen, maybe it'll find in those tire-marked roads something we've lost. A reminder that greatness doesn't come from dominance. It comes from building something that lasts. So, what do we do with a story like this? Do we file it under Africa Rising and move on? Do we call it impressive but isolated? Or do we stop just for a moment and ask ourselves the harder question, why did it take a country buried in debt, long ignored by the global stage, to show us what sustainable development actually looks like? Why wasn't this done in Detroit or Dallas? Why not in Kentucky, where tires pile up and bridges collapse? Why did it take a young captain, in fatigues with no IMF blessing, to remind the world that real leadership isn't about managing expectations, it's about building reality? Because that's what Ibrahim Traoré has done. He hasn't waited for permission. He hasn't played by the old colonial rules. He's shown through roads, canals, and solar grids that a nation doesn't need wealth to be wise. It only needs will. But here's the warning we must not ignore. What's happening in Burkina Faso isn't guaranteed to last. Innovation can be crushed. Progress can be sabotaged. Empires don't like being outshined by the very nations they once dismissed. That's why this story matters now more than ever. Because it's not just about rubber roads or green canals. It's about who gets to define what development looks like. It's about the right of poor nations to think for themselves, to build for themselves, to rise not because the West approves, but because their people demand it. And for those of us watching from afar, especially here in America, we must decide, will we keep pretending we have nothing to learn? Or will we finally listen to those who are rising, not with dollars, but with dignity? So, let me ask you, do you believe that President Ibrahim Traoré's reform strategies are truly a model for the world, or just a passing moment? Can we continue to ignore these quiet revolutions, or should we start taking notes? Leave a comment if you believe the future of innovation might come from the very places we once overlooked. Share this story if it gave you hope. Subscribe if you still believe that truth, no matter where it comes from, deserves to be heard. Because in Burkina Faso, the revolution isn't just coming, it's already under our feet.